Welcome to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. It's the show geared toward keeping you up to speed with the latest auto news, event coverage, and expert industry insight. Now, here are your hosts, Matt Avery and John Craman.
Hey, and welcome everyone to another episode of On the Move. I'm Matt Avery, executive producer of The Transmission. Joining me is my co-host, John Craman, lead TV commentator for Mecum Auctions on NBCSN. John, today we are talking about one of your favorite vehicles, and that's the Chevrolet Corvette.
Well, we've got a couple of the top Corvette experts coming in to join us, Matt. First up, segment 2, we've got Ken Lingenfelter. Ken is the strength behind Lingenfelter Performance Engineering. Going to bring us up to speed on what's happening there and also some driving impressions from the C8. And then Guy Larson, that name might be recognizable as the guy that runs Bloomington Gold. And so we're going to learn a lot about the judging process, how it all works, how important it is, and the rescheduled event that they will be holding this year in September.
Before we get to all that, John, Mecum just wrapped up the big Gone Farming auction in Davenport. And to find out the latest, we've got Paul Demchenko, Gone Farming Consignment agent, in the studio for all the details. Paul, tell us, how was the auction environment?
Overall, it was a huge success. We had a lot of challenges with the setup, trying to keep everybody apart and social distancing and trying to follow all the guidelines that the CDC has outlined. But overall, it was a big success. We did it outside. We set it up like a band concert, and it was phenomenal.
Important, guys, because it was the first event during this new era since March. And so what it did is it showed us, thanks to Paul, you, and all the efforts from the team, that Mecum can successfully operate an auction in this new environment. That having said, how would you compare the overall energy, enthusiasm level to this auction versus back in the traditional era?
Back in the traditional era, we would have had probably twice the amount of people on site. We still had a huge crowd. I think we had over 2,500 people on site, but we did have a huge presence on the internet and on the phones.
Paul, can you give us an idea of some of the top sellers?
We had everything from tractors. The highest selling tractor was a 1938 Minneapolis-Moline UDLX, and that sold for $129,000. We also had a muscle tractor, which is the new thing with tractors. It was a 1969 John Deere 4520. It was a conversion. They actually took a GM diesel and put it into a tractor, and that sold for $78,750. And then we still are selling our vintage tractors, which from 1911 we sold a Case 30 horsepower steam engine for $75,000. And as far as trucks go, I think we nailed it with a 1951 Chevrolet Napco 3/4 ton pickup, $75,000.
Interesting you mentioned trucks, Paul, because that has become, fairly recently, that's become a big part of the Gone Farmin', typically tractor-themed auctions. Is that a trend that's going to continue in the future?
I think so. I think we found a really good match with tractors and trucks together. They really go hand in hand, and we have a lot of crossover buyers, and they really appreciate the pickup trucks. They remember them from having them on the farm.
Paul, what was the overall environment with the people that were coming? I mean, did it seem like a lot of the enthusiasts were ready to get back to the auction environment?
Yes, I think a lot of people just wanted to get out. We had people that actually came all the way as far from Florida, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. We had another guy that came from the Washington state. So it didn't stop the people that really wanted to get out. They were there.
And what's the next event that your team will be gearing up for?
Our next event is our fall auction, and that's on November 18th, and that's going to be in the Quad Cities, and it's usually a really big event. With the tractor business, they need a lot of time to get things set up, so we will have twice the inventory. We had over 400 tractors at this auction, but we'll probably have close to 700 at the next one.
Well, that sounds great, Paul. Hey, thanks so much. Congratulations on a great event, and we look forward to talking Gone Farmin' in the future with you.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Now, the Mecum team is not slowing down. Right now, the Eddie Vinoy auction is taking place in North Carolina. And then, John, from there, the team will turn their attention towards the big Spring Classic in Indianapolis.
Well, that's what everybody's focused on now, Matt, and I am very pleased to report that the 33rd annual Dana Mecum's Original Spring Classic now has a record number of entries. That was just Frank Mecum made that announcement a day or two ago. So it's really interesting, getting comments from Paul on how well the tractor auction went in this new era. And it looks like what we refer to as the Spring Classic, even though it's going to be held in the summer this year for obvious reasons, is going to go on bigger and better than ever. And nothing makes us feel more gratified and more excited to think that we're getting back to business in a really big way. Big success at the Farmin auction. We're going to say that the Vinoy auction also is going to be very successful. We'll report on that next week. And, the Spring Classic is the granddaddy of all Mecum auctions, began all the way back in 1988.
John, turning our attention to some car news, Ford has announced that the unveiling of the Bronco will no longer be taking place on July 9th, but now July 13th. So we'll have to wait a couple more days for final details.
I would say that in calendar year 2020, this is the most anticipated reveal of all the manufacturers, at least that we're certainly aware of at this point. And it's kind of funny, as the world has changed over the past couple of years, the automotive world in particular, all the manufacturers now are doing a lot of buildup for these reveals. It's getting to be a very exciting time. So looking forward to getting all the details on the Bronco power plants, powertrains as far as transmissions. Rumor has it an old school 3-pedal manual will be available. And then, of course, pricing also is going to be hopefully announced at the same time.
Besides the Bronco, Ford also has enthusiasts excited with the announcement that the Mustang Mach 1 will be returning, this time showing up on a 2021 model year.
Yeah, no surprise, Matt, that Ford has decided to bring back that nameplate. We first saw that back in 1969 as not only as a performance version of the Mustang, but also one that had some really nice bling and a performance image on the exterior as well. So they're following that tradition, but what they've done? They have definitely taken the technology and the performance, and they brought that up a couple notches as well.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how Ford is sliding it right above, obviously, the GT, but below the Shelby GT350. So the vehicle is going to offer 480 horsepower. A 6-speed manual transmission is standard, and then there's an optional 10-speed automatic. They get that bump in power with some upgrades from Shelby, including the intake manifold, the oil filter adapter, the engine oil cooler. Some of the things that I liked on the car, John, is that it seems like Ford has really paid attention to bringing in some nostalgia. There's new aluminum 5-spoke tarnished dark wheels that Ford says is a modern version of the classic Magnum 500s.
Yeah, I could kind of see the heritage of the vintage, but it's thoroughly modern all the way. It's really kind of a stepping stone, and Ford has done a really great job of this, most recently with the Bullet, which was kind of a hopped-up GT. Of course, the new Mach 1, based on the Mustang GT, 460 horsepower stock, and you mentioned the bumps for the extra power. They've also upgraded the transmission using the same 6-speed manual that the GT350 has. So what they've done is they've added some essence of the GT350, but they've kept it kind of that retro vibe strong with the Mach 1 nameplate. My prediction is going to be very, very successful in the marketplace. I think it's going to really sell.
And as of yet, Ford has, all they've said is it is limited edition, but have not announced how many they'll be making. So it'll be interesting to see what that tally ends up at.
Yeah, it could be just maybe a 1 or a 2 year run of the Mach 1 nameplate. So my suggestion is, if it talks to you, get one now.
Mecum Auctions is proud to bring you On the Move with Matt Avery and John Crayman. For more on the world of collector cars, head over to Mecum.com. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, our next guest certainly knows his way around a performance vehicle, and that includes Corvettes. We're so excited to have Ken Lingenfelter joining us. Ken, thanks so much for stopping by.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Ken and I have been friends for a long time, and he is the guy at the top of Lingenfelter Performance Engineering. Ken, take us back to day one. How did it all begin?
Well, I have to tell you, I can't take credit for starting the company. I had a distant relative, John Lingenfelter, and a lot of people in the drag racing world would know about John. He was not afraid of anything, to be honest with you. Got things going in 1972. Our company's going to be over 46, 47 years old this year. And John was, as I said, the ultimate drag racer, engineer, really built a name for performance over the years, did a lot of drag racing. Summit Racing was the sponsor for a number of the cars that John drove. And as I said, unfortunately, because he wasn't afraid of anything, John suffered a horrendous crash at Pomona in 2002 and had severe injuries, started to recover, but unfortunately passed away Christmas Day 2003. And at that point, I had been a drag racer all my life. My dad ran a Fisher body plant years ago. I was a car guy from the time of 5 years old, and I remember him taking me to a tech center open house, and I got a look at my first split window Corvette and at age 10, and they had the Mako Shark Corvettes there. And I mean, I was already a car guy, but seeing that Corvette, I was going to be a Corvette guy for life. When John passed, the company needed some direction. John's brother, Charlie, convinced me to step in. I had just sold a company that I had built over years to a public company, and it just seemed like the right time to do that. So from that point on, I became the owner of Lingenfelter Performance Engineering and got a chance to take care of all my drag racing energy there. And in addition to that, got an opportunity to really expand on the car collection that we have here in Brighton, Michigan.
Before we get, I'm really curious to hear some of your favorites in the collection, Ken. What are the capabilities of the shop, Lingenfelter Performance Engineering? Certainly Corvettes now in this current world, but you guys do a lot in that shop. Fill us in.
Yeah, we've got two shops, actually. We've got one in Decatur, Indiana, the original shop, and then we have one up in Wixom, Michigan. And, pretty much anything a drag racer would want, we can do. We build a lot of performance cars, mostly Corvette, but Camaro and Cadillac CTSV, and we will once in a while do a Mopar or two, but it pretty much stayed true to General Motors products, and again, Corvette being the major product. So we build engines. We're really a 50% parts business. We engineer and build our own performance parts, and those are always available online at Lingenfelter.com. But we built quite a few performance cars over the years, cutting our teeth mostly on the C4 Corvette, and as you know, we're very focused on the new Corvette that's coming out right now.
Hey, Ken, you mentioned that car collection. Tell us some of the highlights.
Well, I started collecting cars, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 years ago. I had about 50 cars, and, as part of getting into the drag racing field and everything else, there are cars that I owned that I just did not want to sell after I had them. But we had the 50 cars kind of stuffed into a 20-some thousand square foot building. And, we decided that there were some really great cars in there. Some of my old race cars, some of John's old race cars. But I started buying cars just that I liked. It really had nothing to do. I know a lot of guys, for example, like to collect cars with VIN numbers or all convertibles or all Chevrolets or something like that. But my taste runs all over the board. And John, you know that. You've seen me buy some really kind of strange cars at the Mecum auctions over the years. But it's a very eclectic collection. We needed more space, so we added another 40,000 square feet to the facility here. And that gave me all the room in the world. In fact, when I got it done, I looked at it and I said, I'll never fill this place up. But car enthusiasts, it didn't take very long for me to fill it up. And so we've got 250 cars in the collection. I keep about 190 in the main facility, but we're not open to the public. Its mission is charity fundraisers. And so we're a venue for fundraisers. That's how the public gets to see it, because the typical program, for example, like with the American Cancer Society, is we'd have an open house. People who want to come by and make a donation right at the door. And then they're invited in to see the car collection. It was an idea that my wife and I had in the beginning. We thought maybe people might like to get a look at the cars that I'd bought over the years, and it's always fun to share them. But it's turned out to be a really incredible model. And we did 60 events here last year. Everything from black tie to pizza and beer with car guys. So it's turned out to be a really good venue for people who want to do some donating to charity and see some really great cars.
Well, so much news over the past year about the C8. Now they're out. Deliveries have begun. You have taken delivery of several new C8s, some of which I believe are undergoing some development with your company, Ken, but fill Matt and I in on some of your initial driving reactions. I presume you've had a chance to have some time out on the street with the car, particularly compared to maybe the C7s and the C6s.
Well, that's a good question to ask, because I have to tell you, my driver Corvette from last year was a 2019 ZR1. And those who know me know I'm a big white with red fan. So most of the Corvettes I own and drive are, white with red interior. I picked up this 2019 ZR1 brand new, and I've just been enchanted with that car. Best Corvette I've ever owned. Was able to drive it anywhere. I've been to Chicago with it, and New York. It's amazing. I've got 25,000 miles on it, and obviously I've got a lot of cars to choose from when I go out into the collection and decide what's going to be a driver that day. So that's a lot of miles for me to put on in 1 year on one car. So when the new one came out, I was a bit of a skeptic because I'm so enchanted with this 2019 ZR1. But you're right, I got an early one. We've got, a pretty good relationship with General Motors. We do some engineering work and such with them. And, I got myself early on the list for one, and white with red, it arrived. And so I got right into it, went right at it. And it is such a different driving experience from that ZR1. That long hood on the ZR1 and the weight on the front, and it's very different, no question about it. You seem to sit a little lower. It's odd not having that big, huge front end on it. Not bad, just different. And but once you spend a little time in it, once you get it broken in and start cornering with it and everything else, you can see and understand why it was so important to have that mid-engine. It feels in a lot of ways, and this is probably a terrible comparison, but you have a go-kart kind of a feel to it. It's, you're sitting right in the center of the weight, and it's a good feeling. Car is amazing. Just like every other Corvette, and I've owned a bunch of them over the years, amazing bang for the buck. So impressed by what General Motors was able to do for the price. And to be honest with you, I don't think they could have done a better job on the styling. It is just drop dead gorgeous. Wherever I take it, I mean, I went to an event a couple of weeks ago, and I had to pull off and get some gasoline. I think 15 cars followed me off the expressway just so they could get out of the car and, come and take a look at it. So it's very, very, very impressive.
Hey, Ken, can you tell us a little bit about what your team is developing in terms of performance modifications for the C8?
Matt, we've always been able to find more horsepower. I mean, it's not as though this car lacks any horsepower at 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds as it is right now. And it's got a lot of performance in it already, but our customers always want more. And so we've gotten very good at the LT engines, the direct injection engines. We're very, very good in understanding where to find power quickly. This car will be a little bit more of a challenge because there's so many electronics. Everything is electronic, the transmission, the brakes, the steering, and it's all tied to an engine management system that we're going to have to learn and understand and try to see if we can work around some of the things that are in it. There are some peripheral things. There'll be exhaust, and there'll be some intake, and maybe some other things that we can do. I know there's some handling things that we can do to prepare the car for the track a little better, but we've got our work cut out for us. There's no question about it. Getting through the electronics will be a handful. I'm confident we can do it. but it'll take time. That's for sure.
Interesting, Ken, that Chevrolet decided not to offer manual transmission in this car, and presumably maybe never will. But from what I've read, I want to get your comments on how well you think that the dual clutch 8-speed automated manual performs in that car. Are you disappointed it doesn't have a manual? Do you like this new transmission? I'm interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, John, you're right. That ZR1 that I was just kind of gushing over a little bit, that 2019, has got a manual transmission, and I love that. I mean, I'm probably going to keep that car forever, just because of that and the manuals, because you're right, they're gone for good. Having said that, there are Ferraris and there are Lamborghinis and there's a Bugatti and there are other cars in the collection, so I've had an opportunity to get used to the paddle shifters. I think the first one I got was a 360 Ferrari back years ago, and they've gotten a lot faster and a lot crisper since then, obviously. But I found the transmission to be great. I haven't had the car on the track yet. I've got some track days coming up. We have the white one for me. I have a black one that we bought at the same time. That's been in engineering. We have an orange one coming in about a week or so, and then I always get my wife one too. She's a racer as well. In fact, she does more racing these days than I do, and she likes the automatic transmissions and always had them. So this isn't going to be a big deal for her. But I have to tell you, maybe it's my age. I don't regret the fact that it doesn't have a manual, but I have other manual cars I can drive, and that's probably why. It's funny because I'm so over the top an enthusiast that the idea of going through winter without a sports car to drive, because we're up here in Michigan, that's where our base is, and I got to have something with all-wheel drive to get me through the winter, and I love having a manual available. So every fall for the past few years, I've gone out and got a 911, either a 4S or turbo, put some Continental snow tires on it, and drive it through the winter with its manual transmission. And so I've got a way I can go and enjoy a manual transmission, but I can also then drive this Corvette and with its automatic. And the transmission's amazing. Again, bang for the buck. It's just as good as some of my supercars in the collection, and for a lot less money.
Hey, Ken, besides for all the development that your team is doing on the C8, any other projects that you can kind of fill us in on?
Yeah, we've found some ways. I mean, we've been supercharging the trucks, and the truck is the SUVs are a big deal right now. We've just completed a program. We have a 50-state legal supercharger that we can use on the Colorado and the Canyon. And it's a very popular product. Those are great trucks from General Motors right from the factory. But, a lot of people felt they were a little underpowered. And, we can make 450 up to 500 horsepower with a supercharger on that V6 engine. And, it's a great product, fun truck to drive. And, we've been working on all the rest of the trucks, the SUVs as well. And we should have some announcements coming out soon on just how far we can take the whole line of SUVs with, again, General Motors trucks.
Final question for you, Ken. We're kind of in a new world here, operating within the virus environment. How has Lingenfelter Performance Engineering adapted?
I think fine. I guess none of us really understand what all our businesses are like on the other side of this COVID thing, wherever even that is. We were able to keep our shops open because we do some essential work with the cars. So we had both shops open during the stay-at-home orders, but we had our staff, sales, and clerical people working from home. So we made it through that round of it. The disappointing thing for me is the number of events that have had to cancel. And, of course, I'm going to be at the Mecum auction here next week. For a week after next, I guess, for a little bit. I can't do the whole thing because of other commitments, but so I'm really glad to see that happening. This year will be my 42nd Indy 500 in a row, and I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping that will stay in place for August 23rd. It is what it is. You work through it. I've been a businessman. I started my first business in 1978, and I have worked through just about everything I think you can imagine, with 9/11 and with interest rate jumps and recessions and so on and so forth. And so this too will pass, and I'm relatively confident we'll come out of it the other side. Thank goodness our brand is as strong and as well known around the country and the world. I think that'll help us be a survivor through this whole thing. So.
Well, Ken, it's great to hear that you and your team are making it through this weird season. And I know, John, I definitely can't wait to see how far you guys are able to take that C8 performance. Thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. Things like this are a lot of fun, and I'm certainly looking forward to the Mecum auctions coming up.
Don't adjust that dial. On the Move, we'll be right back. Our program is proudly presented by Mecum Auctions, the world's largest collector car auctions. Now back to Matt and John.
In the booth, we have a very special guest here today, a name some of you from the Corvette world are definitely going to recognize. So great to have Guy Larson, the proprietor of Bloomington Gold. Thanks so much for coming in, Guy. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Fun to be here.
Now, Guy, you have been a part of Bloomington Gold for 20 years. Tell us, how did the show get started and where is it at today?
The show began in 1973 in Bloomington, Illinois, and they held a small car corral, they called it. Just a bunch of people got together with Corvettes and parked them in a fairgrounds in a dusty Dust Bowl kind of a field, they called it. And it grew pretty quickly because they started inviting people to bring parts for sale also, and the swapping of parts was a big thing then. Back in the 70s, no internet, no catalogs. You just had to go somewhere to find parts. So it grew from that. Later in the late 70s, they had done a couple car shows, and David Burrows was involved with the car corral and what evolved into Bloomington Gold. And David thought, well, some people are going home happy. They got a first place trophy, and a lot of other people are not going home happy. So he started working on that, and he came up with a concept where not just one person could get the top award, but everybody could get the top award. And what he created was a judging system where you judged Corvettes against how they left the factory, originality and authenticity. So every car that was in the judging field could get the top award, which they called a gold award, or none of the cars might attain it, but there wouldn't be one winning over another. So that really took off, and things grew from there.
I think that's a really important point to make, Guy, and I think one of the success for the Bloomington Gold show today is because everybody goes up against the judging standards. Every car is judged on its own merit. Is that going to continue along in the future? And how important do you think it is for somebody of an investment grade Corvette to get their car judged at a high level, such as at Bloomington Gold?
Well, yes, it is going to continue. That is sort of the heart of the judging and the heart of Bloomington Gold now. That a car can be judged against how it left the factory. It's not up to some judge's discretion whether he likes a certain aspect of the car or he thinks something is right. It's not what they think. It's what is documented and it can be shown. And in rare instances, we have some cars come with something very unusual where we say, that's the only one we've ever seen, and we can't say that it is or is not as it left the factory because nobody has any documentation. This came up with the C3 ZL1. We've judged one of those, and there's either 1, 2, or 3 of those that were made. There's different stories about that, but we had a ZL1 come from judging, and the stamping on the engine pad we could not authenticate, and we could not say it was incorrect. So that gives our judging credibility because it is very definitive. It's not up to the judge to accept something or not.
Along those lines, Guy, over the years, any other fascinating Corvettes come to light at the show?
Oh yeah. We've had we've had a lot of prototype cars. That's interesting. We had one that is considering being judged this year. I won't go into it a lot, but it's a production L88, when they started producing those in 67. So it was before that, but it was factory done. And the car's well known, but there's some aspects of the car that the owner has to provide us documentation so we can verify that they are correct or not. We've had, speaking of the L88s, we do an L88 gathering every 10 years, and so in 2018 we did our last one. We called it the Explosion, and we had 40-some L88s out of, it's debatable how many exist, but say low 100s that exist. In the 1967 group, we had 13 on display. There are only 17 remaining of the 20 that were built, and we had 13 of them there. It was pretty phenomenal to see. So we've had some, and we judged some of those. We judged a couple of those L88s, the 67s. So there's some pretty unusual cars come through.
And the big news this year, Guy, is a new venue. Is that right? Yes,
we are moving to a new location, the Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis, the home of the Indiana Colts. So it's the first time in 40-some years of existence that the majority of our show will be indoor. And I said majority because we were saying it's an all-indoor show. Well, we have too many vendors to fit in the vendor area, so we started putting some vendors outside that are okay with it. But all the cars and all the main attraction will be indoor, weather protected, no rain, which we will look forward to.
And the dates are September
11th and 12th, Friday and Saturday.
So that is a move from the traditional dates, of course, but what has been the response from attendees, exhibitors, spectators so far with the move of the date?
Very good. The vendors are really coming on quickly because they have had no venues to go to. And up until probably August, they don't have much of anything to do in July. So, they earn a living doing this. So they're anxious to get out and be at a big event and sell and be with car guys, car people.
Give us a little summary of the judging categories that Bloomington Gold is responsible for.
Well, our two main brackets, I guess you'd say, of judging is certification and survivor. Survivor, by the way, is a word that we have trademarked, and people use it loosely. But we have a set of standards that make a car a survivor or not. And basically, it's the majority of the car has to be unrestored in 4 sections of the car: the interior, exterior, chassis, and engine compartment. So all of them have to be the majority of it unrestored. And to get that, then in that group, there is a bronze, silver, and gold level of survivor. To get a gold survivor, the car has to be 80% unrestored in all 4 areas, not an average, but all areas have to be over 80. Very difficult to do. So there aren't that many cars that attain that, and when we ramped up to that level of judging just in the last decade, having the bronze, silver, and gold levels, and it actually drew more interest. The cars are more interested in attaining that difficult level of gold. The other judging we do is certification judging, which is judging a car and many components, several hundred components of the car, compared to how those components were when they left the factory. So they judge every nut and bolt and the keys and the top and the glass and everything compared to how it left the factory in terms of finish, date codes, completeness, configuration, the shape of the piece, and things like that. And then they have to be to get a gold certification, the car has to be 95% or more compared to how it left the factory. Again, very difficult, especially for older cars that were driven and parts were replaced.
And that would be primarily for cars that have been restored as opposed to survivor cars that are pretty much original. Is that correct?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I'd say that most of the cars on the certification judging field are restored cars, or at least partially restored. But there will also be cars that were never restored, and they can go and get survivor judging and certification judging. And if they pass at the highest levels, then they are candidates to be a benchmark car. And benchmark, if you think about that word, that means that somebody else could look at a benchmark car and restore their car to it and know that they're getting the right configurations, the right finishes, the right colors, and so on. So a benchmark car is pretty difficult to achieve.
How many cars each year do you see at that level?
I don't know the exact answer, but I would tell you less than 10 each year.
Out of how many Corvettes will be judged?
It varies, but 80 to 100, sometimes a little more, but generally in that area. So some years we'll only have like 2 cars that do benchmark. Over the years that we have done both judgings and had the benchmark category, there are a little over 400 cars that have achieved that, which sounds like a lot until you say, well, over 30 to 40 years. That's not a lot.
No, not especially not considering that over 1 million Corvettes have been built.
And the farther you go back, if you look at, let's say you were interested in 1963s, and I could look up in the paperwork, and I just know common sense. There are very few benchmark cars as you go older and older, because when those cars were initially around, nobody knew that it mattered to preserve everything correctly, and they didn't worry about throwing the wiper blades away and putting on whatever brand they found out of the auto parts or any part. So as years progressed, people took different care of the Corvette and they kept it more authentic, in the later years. But in those early years, they didn't know that. So to find a car that is highly accurate and authentic is pretty rare.
Guy, when it comes to your personal taste, what kind of Corvettes stand out for you? What are the ones that you like?
Personally, I like the early C3s, they call them. So that's 68 to 72. And they're also referred to as the Shark because the car was literally styled after a shark. And I just think they're neat. They have a great appeal in look. They have performance, and they're comfortable to be in. To me, those are like important reasons why some cars stay popular over the many years.
So what have you got right now currently as part of your personal Corvette collection?
I have Sharks. I have a 69. It's a totally restored car. It's black with bright blue interior, and it is the only known documented black-blue combination car for that year. It's been judged at NCRS and Bloomington, and it has Canadian paperwork, which if I can take a minute on that, and a little bit of education for the Corvette world, a car with Canadian paperwork is probably the best documentation you can have because Canada kept the records on all the Corvettes and other cars that came in, and you can contact them still and give them a VIN number for a car that was delivered to Canada, and they will give you a report of exactly what was on the car, when it came, the date, what dealer, and it's ironclad. All other paperwork can be reproduced, we could say. Canadian paperwork can always be verified. If you thought somebody made up a Canadian paperwork, you could spend, I think it's $140 today, and get a copy of the Canadian paperwork on the car, and boom, it's right.
I'm guessing your 69 probably does not have the base 300 horse 350 in it.
No, it's 427, 435.
And then what else have you got, Corvette with a performance theme?
I've got a 2010 ZR1. Those are great cars, the C6 performance cars, the Z06s and the ZR1. They're very comfortable car to drive. You can go out to dinner, drive it around town, and go around a corner and stick your foot to the floor, and all of a sudden it turns into a monster high-performance car.
Last question. The future. Resto mod's been a big part of the Corvette world, especially C1, C2, C3s to a certain degree, but C1s and C2s. What do you see in the future for Bloomington Gold in regard to resto mods?
Well, last year we invited some resto mods to be on display, and it's pretty well known that the resto mod is one of the growing portions of the Corvette hobby where people are very interested in them. and we had 7 or 8 on display, and people were around them all day and asking questions, and there weren't 2 of them that were alike in any way whatsoever. So it's really interesting. And then next to them, we have all these certification cars that are all lined up sort of identical. There'd be 10 63s and 15 67s. Here we had 7 or 8 cars that were very different from each other. So the future, we are actually inviting Restomods again this year, and we are working feverishly to come up with a plan to judge Restomods, and I hope that we will be doing that this year in September.
So, Guy, Bloomington Gold will be happening this year, September 11th and 12th, at a new venue in Indianapolis. Where's the best place for listeners to get the latest with the show?
Our website, www.bloomingtongold.com, and you can nose around in there and find all the information you need.
Guy, thanks so much for coming in, and I'm guessing that you're going to be set up with a display at Mecum Indy coming up mid-July. Is that correct?
Yes, we will be at Indy.
Thanks for coming in. We'll see you there, man.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
You've been listening to Mecum Presents On the Move, brought to you by State Farm. For more information, visit Mecum.com. And join us again next time as we take you inside the world of muscle and collector cars and more.